Some stories don't start with fanfare or grand adventure. They begin with a single step down a dusty road, a worn canvas bag, and a heart too weary to hope but too stubborn to quit. This is a tale for those of us who have known what it feels like to be looked at sideways, judged before we could speak, dismissed before we could prove our worth. It is for anyone who has ever wondered if there might be a place in this world where they could finally belong. In the American West of the 1880s, life was hard but honest. A man's word meant something. A woman's resilience could move mountains. And sometimes, in the most unlikely places, a remote cabin, a silent supper table, a child's searching eyes, broken folks found each other and built something new. This is the story of May, and the mountain man who needed her more than he knew. The road climbed steady, and May's boots had long since stopped complaining about the rocks. 3 hours of walking will do that. The leather had surrendered to the terrain somewhere around the second mile, and now her heels just went numb with each step. She shifted the canvas bag on her shoulder. The strap had worn a groove into her collarbone, a dull ache she'd stopped noticing an hour ago. Inside the bag, one dress, a little worse for wear, a pair of stockings with a hole she'd been meaning to mend, a handkerchief, half embroidered with forget-me-nots, her mother's pattern, never finished. That was everything she owned in this world. The afternoon sun filtered through the pine and oak, throwing long shadows across the path. A mockingbird called from somewhere in the branches, answered by another farther up the ridge. The air smelled of warm earth and pine needles, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers growing along the roadside. Somewhere below, the town of Ridgeback sat in its valley, going about its business. May didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now. "Did you hear about the Miller girl's boarder, the fat one?" "Oh, the I heard she was run out of her last town for she'd left before they could finish the sentence. The words found her anyway. They always did. Mrs. Miller at the boarding house had been kind enough. She'd handed May a folded paper with directions scratched in pencil and said, 'There's a man up the mountain, widower, 3 young ones. He don't ask questions, and he pays fair.'" May had taken the paper without asking what fair meant. The trees thinned out ahead. Through the gaps, she could see it now, a cabin, built low and solid against the slope, with a porch that wrapped around one side and smoke curling lazy from the stone chimney. Not large, not fancy. Just there, like it had grown out of the mountain itself. She stopped at the edge of the clearing. 3 children in the yard. 2 girls, one maybe 9. The other, no more than 6, crouched near a chicken coop. Poking at something in the dirt with sticks, a boy stood apart. Older, maybe 12. He had a hatchet in his hand, splitting kindling on a stump with the kind of steady rhythm that spoke of long practice. The younger girl saw May first. She froze mid-poke, her stick suspended in the air. Then the older girl looked up. Then the boy. The hatchet stopped. May stood at the edge of the clearing, her bag heavy on her shoulder. The afternoon light falling warm across her face. She knew what they saw. She'd seen it in enough mirrors, in enough shop windows, in enough strangers' eyes. A large woman in a faded calico dress, dusty boots, sweat-dampened hair escaping from its pins. Nothing about her suggested she belonged here or anywhere. Truth be told, the boy set down the hatchet. He didn't come forward. Instead, he moved to stand in front of his sisters, his thin shoulders squared, his chin lifted, not threatening, just protecting. May understood that. She'd been 12 once. She'd tried to protect folks too, in her own way. It never worked out like you hoped, but you did it anyway. She waited. The younger girl, 6, with tangled brown hair and a smudge of dirt across her nose, peered around her brother's elbow. Her eyes were wide, curious, not quite afraid. The older girl stayed crouched, her stick still in hand, watching May the way you'd watch a strange dog that wandered into your yard. Not hostile, not friendly, just measuring. The cabin door opened with a creak of old hinges. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard that needed trimming and eyes the color of weathered wood. He wore a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he carried a splitting axe in one hand like he'd forgotten it was there. He looked at May, then at the children, then back at May. "Mrs. Miller send you up." His voice was low, unhurried, not unfriendly, but not welcoming either. Just a question that needed answering. May nodded. "You know how to cook." "I know how to cook." "You scare easy." May almost smiled. Almost. "I reckon I scare easier around people than I do around mountains." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, nothing that generous, but a slight loosening around his eyes, like she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. He set the axe against the porch railing. "Name's Silas Mercer." "May," she said. Just May. The last name didn't matter anymore. Silas looked at her for another long moment. Then he nodded toward the cabin door. 3 children. My wife Sarah passed on 3 years back. I need someone to keep house, cook meals, look after things when I'm working the timber. He paused, his jaw tightening just a touch. "I don't need a wife. I need help." You understand, May appreciated that. No pretense, no expectations dressed up in pretty words. "How long you looking for someone?" "Long as it takes." She didn't ask what that meant. Maybe he didn't know himself. The boy still stood between May and his sisters, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Maybe. Or something older than suspicion, the kind of wariness that comes from being disappointed too many times before. The younger girl had edged out from behind him, her curiosity winning over caution. She tugged at her brother's sleeve. "Tom," she whispered, loud enough for May to hear clear across the yard. "Is she staying?" Tom didn't answer. He just kept watching May, his jaw set tight, his hands hanging loose at his sides. Silas glanced at his children, then back at May. Well, May looked at the cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the 3 children who hadn't smiled at her, hadn't welcomed her, hadn't done anything but stand there and wait to see what she would do next. She thought about the road back down the mountain, the town, the whispers that would follow her wherever she went. She thought about the weight of her bag on her shoulder, and how light it suddenly seemed compared to everything she'd left behind. "I'll try it for a month," she said. Silas nodded once. Then he turned and walked back inside, leaving the door standing open behind him. May stepped forward. The younger girl, Lily, she would learn later, watched her with those wide, curious eyes. Tom didn't move, didn't speak, but he didn't stop her either. May walked past him, up the porch steps that creaked under her weight, and through the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and cold grease, and something else. Something harder to name. Neglect. Maybe. Or just loneliness. Settled into the walls like dust settles into corners. Nobody remembers to sweep. The kitchen table held a stack of unwashed bowls. The stove was cold, though the afternoon was warm enough not to need it. A kerosene lamp sat on a shelf by the window, its glass chimney smudged dark with soot. On the mantel above the fireplace, May noticed a worn Bible, its leather cover cracked with age. May set her bag down by the door. She looked around the room, at the empty chairs and the unwashed dishes, and the silence that hung over everything like a breath held too long. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. If this story has touched something in your heart, a memory, a hope, a quiet corner you'd nearly forgotten, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and follow along for what comes next. And if you have a moment, tell me in the comments where you're reading from today. As the old folks used to say, a story shared is a burden halved and a joy doubled. The stove was colder than May expected. She pressed her palm flat against the cast iron and felt nothing, not even the ghost of warmth from a morning fire. 3 days' worth of ash sat in the firebox, maybe 4. She knelt down, her knees protesting against the rough-hewn floorboards, and began scooping the ash into a tin pail. Gray dust rose in small clouds, settling on her sleeves, her skirt, the backs of her hands. She didn't bother brushing it off. Behind her, footsteps, light ones. The younger girl, Lily, had followed her inside and now stood in the doorway, half hidden behind the frame. May didn't turn around. She kept scooping ash, slow and steady, letting the girl watch. A minute passed, then another. Somewhere outside, a jay called sharp and loud from the pines. "You gonna cook something?" The voice was small, tentative. May glanced over her shoulder. Lily had edged further into the room, her bare feet silent on the wood. Up close. She was thinner than May had realized. The dress she wore, faded blue cotton, hem coming undone, hung loose on her frame. "That's the plan," May said. "Soon as I get this fire going." Lily chewed her lower lip. "Pa usually does the fire." "Does he now?" "He forgets sometimes." May set the pail aside and reached for the kindling box near the stove. A few dry sticks, some wood shavings, a torn page from what looked like an old almanac. She arranged them in the firebox with practiced hands, then struck a match from the tin on the shelf. The flame caught. Held. The smell of sulfur and pine filled the kitchen. Lily watched the fire grow with an intensity that seemed too old for her 6 years. May added a split log, adjusted the damper, and stood up slowly, her lower back aching from the crouch. The kitchen was warming already, or maybe that was just the promise of warmth, the way a room changes when someone decides to stay in it. "What's your name?" Lily asked. "May. Just May. Just May." The girl considered this. Then, "I'm Lily. That's Ellie outside, she's 9. Tom's the one who don't like strangers." May wiped her hands on her skirt. "He tell you that. He don't have to." The back door opened. Silas stepped in, ducking slightly under the low frame. He stopped when he saw the fire crackling in the stove, the cleaned-out firebox. May standing there, with ash on her sleeves and soot on her hands. His expression didn't change, but he looked at that stove for a long moment, longer than seemed necessary before speaking. "Ellie says there's potatoes in the root cellar. Onions, too. If the mice didn't get to 'em." He paused. "Salt pork's in the smokehouse. Keys on the nail by the door." May nodded. Silas turned to leave, then stopped. His hand rested on the doorframe. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Sarah used to keep things a certain way. The children, they remember. It wasn't a warning." "Exactly. But it wasn't nothing either." He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Lily was still watching May, her dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. "Who's Sarah?" May asked. Though she already knew the answer, Lily's face changed just slightly, just around the edges of her mouth. "Mama," she said quietly. And then, even quieter, "She used to stand right where you're standing." The root cellar smelled of damp earth and old wood. May held the kerosene lantern out in front of her, the flame casting long shadows across the stone walls as she descended the narrow steps. Potatoes, there in a crate against the far wall, half buried under a burlap sack. She knelt and sorted through them, her fingers finding soft spots, sprouts, the occasional one too far gone to save. She kept 8 good ones, brushed the dirt off with her palm, and set them in the basket she'd brought. The onions hung from a beam overhead, braided together in long strings, the way her own mother used to do it. Mice had gotten to some of them. She could see the tooth marks, the papery skins torn away, but enough remained. She pulled down 4, added them to the basket, back up the stairs. The late afternoon light hit her eyes, and she squinted against it. Tom was standing by the smokehouse door. He didn't speak, just stood there, arms crossed, watching her the way he'd been watching her since she arrived. His jaw was set, his eyes flat and hard. May walked past him to the smokehouse. The key was where Silas had set a heavy iron thing, rusted at the edges. She fitted it into the lock, turned it with effort, and pulled the door open. The smell hit her first, wood smoke and salt, and the deep, rich scent of cured meat. Slabs of pork hung from hooks along the ceiling, dark and glistening in the dim light. She reached up, cut down a piece about the size of her 2 fists together, and wrapped it in the cloth she'd brought. When she turned around, Tom was still there, closer now, blocking the doorway. "You won't last," he said. His voice was flat, not angry, not cruel, just stating a fact, the way you'd say the sky was blue or the creek ran cold in springtime. May looked at him. 12 years old, she reckoned. Maybe 13 come fall. Old enough to remember his mother clearly. Old enough to have watched other women come and go, hired help. Neighbors meaning well. Whoever else Silas had tried before her. "Maybe not," she said. She stepped forward. He didn't move. For a moment, they stood there, May with her basket of potatoes and onions, the wrapped salt pork tucked under her arm, and this boy who'd already decided to hate her before she'd even cooked her first meal. Then Tom stepped aside, just barely, just enough for her to pass if she turned sideways. May walked back to the cabin without looking at him. The soup took shape slowly. May diced the potatoes into rough cubes, her knife thudding against the worn cutting board in a steady rhythm. The onions came next. She peeled away the outer layers, sliced them thin. Felt her eyes start to water from the sharp fumes. She didn't wipe at them, just kept cutting. The salt pork she cubed small, rendering it in the bottom of the largest pot she could find. The fat sizzled and spat, filling the kitchen with a smell that was simple and honest and older than memory itself. Onions into the fat. The sizzle changed pitch, softened. She stirred with a wooden spoon worn smooth from years of use, scraping the bottom of the pot to keep anything from sticking. Potatoes next, then water from the bucket by the door, ladled in until the pot was 3/4 full. Salt from a small crock on the shelf. A bay leaf she found in a tin marked in faded handwriting. Sarah's handwriting, she figured, though she didn't let herself think about that too long. The fire crackled steady in the stove. The pot began to simmer, sending up curls of steam that smelled like every farmhouse kitchen May had ever known. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked around at the table needed clearing. She gathered the dirty bowls, 5 of them, crusted with the remains of meals she didn't want to guess at, and carried them to the wash basin. The water in the pitcher was cold, but she poured it anyway, added a sliver of lye soap, and began to scrub. The light outside was starting to fade, turning the world soft and golden. Through the window, she could see Silas by the woodpile, splitting logs with that same steady rhythm Tom had shown earlier. Father and son, moving in parallel, neither one speaking. Ellie appeared in the kitchen doorway. The older girl, 9. May reminded herself, stood with her hands clasped in front of her, watching May work with cautious eyes. "You need something?" May asked, not unkindly. Ellie shook her head. But she didn't leave either. May finished the last bowl, set it on the drying rack, and wiped her hands. "Soup's almost ready. You want to call the others in?" Ellie nodded. She started to turn, then stopped. "It smells like—" She caught herself. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Like what?" But Ellie was already gone. Her footsteps quick on the porch boards. May stirred the soup, tasted it, added a little more salt. They gathered around the table as the last light drained from the sky. Silas sat at the head, his weathered hands flat on the wood, his face unreadable in the lamplight. Tom took the seat farthest from May, his back pressed against the wall. Ellie and Lily sat together on the bench, their shoulders touching. 5 chairs around a table built for 5. May noticed that now really noticed it. One chair sat empty at the foot of the table, across from Silas. Sarah's chair. Nobody sat in it. May had set their places while the soup finished bowls she'd washed and dried. Spoons she'd found in a drawer. A pitcher of fresh water from the well. Simple. Clean. The kerosene lamp in the center cast a warm glow across everything, softening the hard edges of the room. She ladled soup into each bowl. The steam rose in curls, carrying the smell of salt pork and onions and potatoes, soft enough to fall apart on the tongue. She served Silas first, then Tom, who didn't look at her, then Ellie and Lily. When she'd filled the last bowl, she hesitated. There was no chair for her. 5 chairs, 5 people who belonged here, and she made 6. Silas noticed. His eyes moved from the empty space beside the stove to May and back again. "There's a stool in the corner," he said quietly. "Sarah used it for mending." May found it a low, 3-legged thing, worn smooth from years of use. She pulled it to the edge of the table, sat down carefully, and ladled soup into her own bowl. Nobody moved. Then Silas bowed his head. "Lord, we thank you for this food and for the hands that prepared it. Bless this meal to our bodies and our bodies to your service. Amen. Amen." The children murmured. May lifted her head. The prayer had caught her off guard. She hadn't heard grace said at a table in years. Lily picked up her spoon first, dipping it into the broth with the eager carelessness of a child who hasn't eaten enough today. She slurped, swallowed, dipped again. Ellie ate more slowly, her eyes on her bowl, her movements careful and precise. Tom didn't touch his spoon. He sat with his arms crossed, staring at the soup like it had personally wronged him somehow. Silas ate. Methodical, unhurried. He didn't comment on the food, didn't praise it, didn't criticize. Just ate. The way a man does when he's been feeding himself for too long to expect anything different. The silence stretched out, filled only by the soft sounds of eating and the crackle of the fire. Then Lily's elbow knocked against her bowl. The soup sloshed over the rim, splashing across the table, dripping onto her lap. She gasped a sharp, startled sound and went rigid in her seat. Her spoon clattered to the floor. Her eyes were wide, fixed on her father. May watched the girl's hands curl into fists, her whole body bracing for something, a shout, a scolding. Something that made her shrink into herself like she was trying to disappear entirely. The room held its breath. May stood up. She crossed to the shelf by the stove, found a clean rag, and walked back to the table. Without a word, she knelt beside Lily and began wiping up the spilled soup from the table first, then from the girl's lap, gentle and unhurried. Lily didn't move, didn't breathe. May finished wiping. She picked up the fallen spoon, set it aside, and reached for the ladle. "Accidents happen," she said, her voice low and even. "That's why we make plenty." She filled Lily's bowl again, steam rising between them. She handed Lily a clean spoon from the drawer. The girl took it. Her fingers were trembling. May returned to her stool, picked up her own spoon, began to eat. Across the table, Tom was watching her. His arms were still crossed, but something in his face had shifted just slightly, just around the eyes. Silas set down his spoon. He looked at May for a long moment, his expression hard to read in the flickering lamplight. Then he picked up his spoon again and kept eating. The meal continued in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, now less like a wall and more like a held breath, waiting to see what might come next. May ate her soup and didn't look up, but she could feel it. The weight of 3 children's eyes on her. The question none of them would ask out loud. "How long before you leave too?" She finished her bowl, stood, began collecting the empty dishes. Lily's hand shot out and grabbed the hem of May's apron. "Will you be here tomorrow?" The question hung in the air, small and fragile as morning frost. May looked down at the girl's hand, thin fingers, dirt under the nails, clutching the worn fabric like it might vanish if she let go. "I'll be here," May said. Lily released her grip, but as May turned toward the wash basin, she caught Tom's eyes across the room. He was still watching her, his jaw tight, his gaze sharp as a blade. And in that look, May saw something that made her stomach go tight. Not anger, not suspicion. Hope, buried deep, armored over with hurt, but there flickering like a candle in a drafty room. He was waiting for her to fail, counting on it. Even because if she failed, he wouldn't have to feel this terrible thing again. The rooster crowed somewhere in the gray half-light before dawn. May's eyes opened. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The smell was wrong. The thin mattress beneath her back unfamiliar. Then it came back. The cabin. The mountain. The children who watched her like she might vanish if they blinked too long. She pushed herself upright. The small room Silas had given her a storage space. Really. With a narrow cot wedged between shelves of preserved goods and old tools was cold enough to see her breath. Her bones ached from the poor mattress, and her feet protested when they touched the icy floorboards. She dressed quickly, fingers clumsy with the buttons on her bodice. The same calico dress as yesterday. The same worn boots. She'd wash the dress when she had time. If she ever had time. The kitchen was dark when she reached it. The stove cold again. Silas hadn't started the fire before heading out. She could hear the distant thunk of an axe somewhere behind the cabin, steady as a heartbeat. He'd been up for hours already, most likely. May knelt by the stove and began building the fire, kindling first dry pine shavings, strips of bark, a few small sticks arranged in a loose pyramid. Then the match, struck against the iron stovetop, the flame catching and spreading with a soft whoosh. She fed it carefully. Too much, too fast, and it would smother. Too little, and it would die. The fire grew, crackling softly, and May added a split log, then another. The smell of wood smoke filled the kitchen, mingling with the lingering scent of last night's soup. By the time the sky outside had shifted from gray to pale gold, the kitchen was warm, coffee water heated in the kettle, sending up steam that fogged the window glass. Cornmeal measured into a bowl. Eggs collected from the hen house, 6 of them. Brown-shelled and still warm from the nest. May worked in silence, her hands moving through tasks that required no thought. This was something she knew. This was something she could do without anyone telling her she was doing it wrong. The children drifted in one by one. Lily first, still in her nightgown, her hair a tangled mess around her face. She climbed onto the bench at the table and sat with her chin propped in her hands, watching May stir the cornmeal batter with sleepy eyes. Ellie next, already dressed, her movements quiet and contained. She took her place beside Lily without a word, her hands folded in her lap. Tom last. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes scanning the kitchen, the fire burning steady in the stove, the coffee steaming in the pot, the plates May had already set on the table. His jaw tightened, just slightly. He sat down at the far end of the bench, as far from May as the table would allow. May ladled batter onto the hot griddle. The cornmeal hissed and sputtered, edges turning golden brown. She flipped the cakes with a wooden spatula worn thin from years of use, stacked them on a plate, added more batter. When the plate was full, she set it in the center of the table, butter in a small crock, a jar of honey she'd found in the pantry, crystallized, but still good. "Let's say grace," May said quietly. The children looked at each other. Then Lily bowed her head, and Ellie followed. Tom hesitated, but he bowed his head too. "Lord, we thank you for this new day and for the food before us. Bless those who sit at this table and keep us in your care. Amen." "Amen," Lily whispered. "Eat," May said. Lily reached for a cake immediately, her small fingers tearing off a piece and stuffing it into her mouth. Ellie took one more carefully, spreading butter with the back of her spoon in neat, even strokes. Tom didn't move. May poured coffee for herself and sat down on Sarah's mending stool. She didn't look at Tom, didn't push, just ate her own breakfast, slow and steady. The silence stretched. Then Tom reached out. His hand hovered over the plate for a moment, just a moment before he grabbed a corn cake and pulled it back to his side of the table. He didn't use butter, didn't use honey, just bit into it dry, chewing with his eyes fixed on some point past May's shoulder. But he ate. May finished her coffee and stood to clear the dishes. The week unfolded in small, ordinary moments. May learned the rhythm of the cabin the way you learn a new song, one note at a time, until the whole thing makes sense. The water bucket by the back door needed filling twice a day, once in the morning, once before supper. The chickens expected feed at dawn, and again at dusk. Scattered in the yard while they clucked and pecked around her boots. The root cellar stayed cool, even in the afternoon heat. And the smokehouse key had a way of sticking in the lock if you didn't jiggle it just right. She learned the children too, or began to. Lily was the easiest. She followed May everywhere, to the garden, to the well, to the chicken coop. She didn't always talk, but she was always there, a small shadow at May's elbow, watching everything with those wide, curious eyes. "What's that?" she asked on the third morning, pointing at the embroidery in May's hands. May had found a few spare minutes after breakfast and had pulled out her mother's unfinished handkerchief, the needle threaded with pale blue. "Forget-me-nots," May said. "It's a kind of flower." "Can I watch?" May nodded. Lily sat beside her on the porch step, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes following the needle as it dipped and rose through the fabric. "They're pretty," Lily said after a while. "My mama taught me how to make them. Long time ago now." "Is she dead too?" The question came out matter-of-fact, the way children ask about death when they've seen enough of it to know it's just part of life. "Yes," May said. "She passed when I was about your sister's age." Lily nodded slowly. "Mama's dead. But Pa says she's with Jesus now." "I reckon that's so." They sat together in silence, the needle moving, the morning sun warm on their faces. Ellie was harder to read. She kept her distance, circling May like a wary barn cat, observing but never quite engaging. On the fourth day, May was pulling weeds in the kitchen garden when she looked up and found Ellie standing at the edge of the plot, a rusted trowel in her hand. Neither of them spoke. Ellie knelt down and began digging around a tomato plant, loosening the soil with careful, precise movements. They worked side by side until the sun was high overhead. The smell of warm earth and green growing things all around them. When May stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt, Ellie was already walking back toward the cabin, the trowel left behind in the garden. But the next morning, she was there again. Tom remained a closed door. He spoke to his sisters in short bursts that were more grunts than conversation. He spoke to Silas the same way, quick, necessary words about chores and work. He did his tasks chopping wood, hauling water, mending the fence where a post had come loose with a grim determination that seemed too heavy for a boy not yet 13. He did not speak to May. She tried once. On the fifth morning, he was splitting kindling by the wood pile, the hatchet rising and falling in that same steady rhythm she'd seen the first day. "You're mighty good at that," she said to Yalma. The hatchet paused mid-swing. Tom looked at her, a flat, measuring look that made her think of stones at the bottom of a cold creek. Then he turned back to his work without a word. May didn't try again. On the sixth night, May made corn cakes for supper. She'd found a bag of cornmeal in the back of the pantry that was different from the one she'd been using coarser ground, with a slightly sweeter smell. She mixed it with buttermilk and eggs, added a little honey, and fried the cakes in bacon fat until they were crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. The children took their places at the table. Silas came in from the porch, washing his hands in the basin by the door before sitting down. May set the plate of corn cakes on the table. Steam rose from them, carrying that sweet, toasted smell through the kitchen. Silas bowed his head. "Lord, bless this food to our use, and us to your service. Amen." "Amen," the children murmured. Tom reached for a cake, then stopped. His hand hung in the air over the plate. His face had gone pale. May saw it happen, the slight widening of his eyes, the sudden stillness that came over his whole body. His hands, which had been reaching for the food, curled slowly into fists. "Where did you get that cornmeal?" His voice was tight, controlled, but something underneath it was shaking like a branch in a hard wind. May frowned. "Basis, the pantry. There was a bag in the back." "That was Mama's." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Lily's spoon clattered against her plate. Ellie went rigid beside her, her face draining of color. Tom shoved back from the table. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made May's teeth ache. That was Mama's cornmeal. She ground it herself. She was saving it for... His voice cracked. He stopped, jaw working, his whole body trembling. She was saving it. May stood frozen by the stove. Tom! Silas's voice, low and steady. Sit down. She had no right. She didn't know. Sit down. Tom didn't sit. He stood there, breathing hard, his eyes fixed on May with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but was both at once, tangled together into a knot too big for his 12-year-old heart to hold. Then he turned and walked out of the cabin. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the dishes on the shelf. The silence that followed was absolute. Lily's lower lip trembled. Ellie stared at her plate, her face white as milk. Silas let out a slow breath. He looked at May, and for the first time, she saw something crack in that weathered, careful face. Sarah made that cornmeal the week before she passed, he said quietly. She was fixing to make Tom's birthday cake with it. He turns 13 next month. May's stomach dropped. She looked at the plate of corn cakes, still steaming in the center of the table. The sweet smell that had seemed so warm and inviting now sat heavy in her throat, like something she couldn't swallow. I didn't know, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. No. Silas stood, pushing his chair back. You didn't... He walked past her toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I'll talk to him. Then he was gone, and May was alone in the kitchen with 2 silent girls and a plate of corn cakes that no one would eat. Later, after the dishes were washed and the children were in bed, May sat on the porch in the dark. The night air was cool on her face, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke and the sweetness of honeysuckle growing wild along the fence. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called a low, mournful sound that echoed off the mountain and faded into nothing. She heard footsteps. Silas appeared at the corner of the porch, a tin cup in his hand. He walked to the railing and stood there, looking out at the darkness. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. He'll come around, Silas said finally. He's angry. But it ain't at you. Not really. May didn't answer. Sarah was... Silas paused, took a breath. She was the one who held this family together. When she passed, it was like someone cut the rope holding up a tent. Everything just... He made a vague gesture with his free hand. Fell down around us. May watched his profile in the moonlight, the hard line of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. You've been doing this alone for 3 years, she said. It wasn't a question. Silas took a long drink from his cup. Had some help here and there. Neighbors. A woman from town for a few months. He shook his head. Didn't take... Tom made sure of that. He chased them off. Didn't have to. He just waited. Watched them the way he watches you. Most folks can't take that kind of watching for long. May thought about Tom's eyes. That flat, measuring look. The way he seemed to be counting down to something, her failure, her departure. The moment she'd prove him right. What happened to the woman from town? Silas was quiet for a spell. She told me Tom needed discipline, said he was too wild, too willful, said if I didn't take a firm hand with him, he'd grow up wrong. And I told her to leave. May looked at him. Just like that. Just like that. Silas set his cup on the railing. Tom ain't wild. He ain't willful. He's a boy who watched his mother die and couldn't do one blessed thing to stop it. You don't fix that with a firm hand. The owl called again, closer this time. May pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. What do you fix it with? Silas didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was so low she almost missed it. I was hoping you might know. He pushed away from the railing and walked back inside, leaving May alone with the darkness and the sound of the wind in the pines. She sat there for a long time, thinking about cornmeal and birthday cakes and a boy who was waiting for her to fail. Then she saw it. On the porch railing, just visible in the pale moonlight, something small and white. May reached for it. A folded cloth napkin, the one she'd used to wrap Tom's rejected corn cakes that first morning. Clean now. Folded neat as you please. Placed right where she would find it. Inside the napkin, a single wildflower. Blue petals, 5 of them, arranged in a perfect star. A forget-me-not. May's heart went still in her chest. Someone had picked this flower. Someone had placed it here. In this napkin, on this railing, knowing she would find it. And the only person who knew about forget-me-nots was Lily. But this wasn't Lily's handwriting on the scrap of paper tucked beneath the flower, a single word, written in a careful, unsteady hand. Sorry. May found Lily behind the chicken coop. The morning had started like any other fire lit, coffee made, breakfast served to 3 children who ate in their usual quiet way. But when May went to scatter feed for the hens, she heard it. A small, choked sound, half swallowed, coming from somewhere behind the weathered boards. She set the feed bucket down and walked around the corner of the coop. Lily sat in a nest of old straw. Her knees pulled up to her chest, her face buried in her arms. Her narrow shoulders shook with each breath, trembling like a bird caught in a storm. May didn't speak. She lowered herself onto the straw beside the girl slowly, her joints protesting, her skirt catching on bits of hay and chicken feathers. The ground was cold through the fabric, and the air smelled of droppings and dust and the green tang of the pines beyond the yard. She sat there, waited. Lily's crying was quiet, the kind of crying that comes from practice, from learning that loud tears bring questions you don't want to answer. May recognized it. She'd cried like that herself, once upon a time, in the back room of her aunt's house after her mother's funeral, in the storage closet of the boarding house in Ridgeback, in all the small, hidden places where no one could see. A minute passed. 2. The chickens clucked and pecked in the yard, going about their business like nothing in the world was wrong. A blue jay screamed from somewhere in the oak tree by the fence. Lily lifted her head. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed, her nose running. She wiped at it with her sleeve, leaving a wet smear across the faded cotton. You didn't ask why, she said. Her voice was thick, waterlogged. May looked at her. You'll tell me when you're ready. Lily's chin trembled. She dropped her gaze to the straw, her fingers picking at a loose strand, pulling it apart, bit by bit. Today's Mama's birthday. The words came out small, fragile, like something made of glass that might shatter if you held it too tight. May didn't move, didn't reach for the girl, just sat there, solid and present, letting the words exist in the air between them. She would have been 32, Lily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Pa used to make her a cake, a real one, with sugar icing. She'd pretend she didn't know about it, but she always knew. She'd act surprised anyway, every single year. A hen wandered around the corner of the coop, pecking at the ground near May's boots. May watched it for a moment, then looked back at Lily. What else did she like, your mama? Lily's face shifted surprise, maybe, or something close to it, like no one had asked her that question in a long while. She liked singing, Lily said slowly. Hymns, mostly. She had a real pretty voice, and she liked the color blue, said it reminded her of the sky on a clear morning. And she liked sitting on the porch when the sun went down, watching the light change on the mountain. May nodded. She sounds like someone worth missing. Lily's eyes filled again. But this time, she didn't hide her face. She just sat there, seeing tears sliding down her cheeks, looking at May with an expression that was somewhere between grief and gratitude. I don't want to forget her, she whispered. But sometimes I can't remember what she sounded like. I try to hear her voice in my head, and it's just quiet, like she's fading away. May understood that quiet, the terrible, hollow silence where a loved one's voice used to live. That don't mean she's gone, May said gently. It just means your memories changed shape is all. The love is still there. It just fits different now. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still working at the straw. Then she reached out tentatively, like she was testing whether the gesture would be allowed, and took May's hand. Her fingers were small and cold and sticky with tears. May held on. They sat like that until Lily's breathing steadied, until the sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened around them. The chickens continued their endless pecking and scratching. The blue jay fell silent, off to make trouble somewhere else. Finally, Lily stood. She wiped her face with both hands, smearing dirt across her cheeks. I should go help Ellie with the wash. May nodded. I'll be in directly. Lily hesitated, then, so quickly May almost missed it. She bent down and wrapped her thin arms around May's neck, a brief, fierce squeeze that smelled of straw and little girl sweat before pulling away and running back toward the cabin. May sat alone in the straw, her hand still warm where Lily had held it. Ellie came to her that afternoon. May was in the garden, on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds from around the bean plants. The sun was high and hot, and sweat had soaked through the back of her dress, making the fabric stick to her skin. Her hands were black with soil, her fingernails caked with it. She heard footsteps and looked up. Ellie stood at the edge of the garden, her hands clasped in front of her the way she always held them, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. She had something in her grip, half hidden by her fingers. Can I ask you something? Her voice was careful, measured. The voice of a child who had learned that questions sometimes came with consequences. May sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. Ask away. Ellie took a step closer. She opened her hands, revealing what she held, May's embroidery hoop. The half-finished handkerchief with its forget-me-nots. I found this on the porch, Ellie said. I wasn't snooping. It was just sitting there on the railing. May looked at the embroidery. She'd left it there last night. She remembered. After she'd found the flower and the note, her mind had been too full to think about picking it up. It's my mother's pattern, May said. She started teaching me before she passed on. I never got around to finishing it. Ellie turned the hoop over in her hands, studying the stitches with a furrowed brow. These are real even, she said. Mama used to say even stitches were the hardest to make. May felt a small pulse of surprise. Your mama did embroidery. Some. She taught me a little. Just the basics. Ellie's mouth tightened at the corners. I haven't done any since She stopped. Her jaw worked like she was chewing on words she couldn't quite swallow. May waited. I was wondering, Ellie said, her voice very controlled now, if maybe you could show me the flower stitch, the one you used for the petals. May looked at the girl, 9 years old, spine straight as a fence post, chin lifted, trying so hard to be strong that it made May's chest hurt just watching. I can show you, May said, but I'll be needing my hoop back first. Something flickered in Ellie's eyes. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing May had seen from her yet. She handed the hoop to May, then sat down in the dirt beside her, heedless of her dress. Her legs crossed beneath her, her hands resting on her knees, her face turned up with an expression of careful attention. Show me. May threaded the needle with blue silk from her little sewing kit. She positioned the hoop, found her place in the pattern, and began to demonstrate slowly, so Ellie could follow every movement. You start at the center. See? Bring the needle up from underneath, then back down again. Just a small stitch. That's your anchor. Then you work outward, like this 5 petals, all the same length, all coming from that center point. Ellie watched with fierce concentration, her eyes tracking every movement of May's fingers. Can I try? May handed her the hoop. Ellie took it carefully, reverently, like it was made of spun sugar that might crumble at too rough a touch. She positioned the needle the way May had shown her tongue poking out between her lips. The first stitch was crooked. The second was better. By the third, she had found a rhythm. That's it, May said. You've got a natural hand for it. Ellie didn't look up, but her shoulders relaxed, just slightly, and something in her face went soft around the edges. They sat together in the garden, the sun warm on their backs, the smell of dirt and green growing things all around them. May watched Ellie stitch careful, focused, determined to get it right, and thought about mothers and daughters and the things that pass between them without any words at all. That night, after supper, Silas lingered in the kitchen. The children had gone to bed, Lily first, then Ellie, then Tom, who still hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to May since the cornmeal incident. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire in the stove and the soft creak of the floorboards as Silas moved to the chair by the window. He sat down heavily, his body settling into the worn wood with the weariness of a man who had been carrying too much for too long. May dried the last dish and hung the towel on its hook. She should go to bed. Her back ached, her feet hurt, and tomorrow would start before dawn. Same as always. But something made her pause. Silas was staring at the window, though there was nothing to see, just darkness, and the faint reflection of the lamp flame on the glass. Sarah used to sit in that chair, he said. His voice was low, almost to himself. Right there, by the window. She'd mend clothes, or read her Bible, or just sit and watch the evening come. May stood by the stove, uncertain. This felt like something private, something she shouldn't be hearing. But Silas kept talking. I used to come in from the fields and see her there, in that lamplight, and think. He stopped. His throat moved as he swallowed. I thought I had more time. I thought we had years, decades, even. I figured I'd grow old watching her sit in that chair. May didn't speak. There wasn't anything to say. She took sick in the spring. Silas continued, his voice steady but distant. Fever first, then the cough. Doc came up from town, but there wasn't much to be done. She held on for 3 weeks. We prayed every day. every night. Then one morning I woke up and she was just gone. Still warm, still looked like she was sleeping peaceful, but gone. His voice didn't break. It stayed level, controlled the voice of a man who had told this story to himself so many times he'd learned to keep the pain locked away where it couldn't spill out and drown him. Tom was 9 when she passed, Silas said. Ellie was 6. Lily was only 3. She barely remembers her mama at all. And that troubles her something fierce. But Tom, he remembers everything. Every last detail. He won't let himself forget a single thing. May thought about the note. The wildflower. The word sorry written in that careful, unsteady hand. He's carrying too much, she said quietly. Silas turned his head and looked at her. In the lamplight, his eyes were dark, tired, full of something May couldn't quite name. We all are. They sat in silence for a long moment. The fire popped and settled in the stove. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like the mountain itself was breathing. Then Silas stood. He crossed to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, just like he'd done that first night. May thought and looked back at her. You're good with them, he said. Better than anyone else has been. May shook her head. I'm just here is all. That's the only thing I know to do. That's more than you know. He walked out onto the porch. Leaving the door open behind him, May stood in the kitchen, the lamp flickering low on the table, the silence settling around her. She looked at Sarah's chair by the window. Empty, waiting, like it was holding a place for someone who wasn't coming back. Tomorrow, she thought, she might find a cushion for it, air it out, maybe move it closer to the stove, where the warmth would reach it better. It shouldn't sit empty forever. She was reaching to turn down the lamp when she heard it. A sound from outside. Footsteps quick, urgent on the porch boards. Then Silas's voice, sharp with something that made May's stomach drop like a stone in a well. May, come quick, it's Tom. May rushed to the porch, her heart knocking hard against her ribs. Silas stood at the railing, pointing toward the tree line. In the pale moonlight, May could just make out a figure small, hunched sitting on a boulder near the edge of the forest. He's been out there the better part of an hour, Silas said. His voice was tight, strained. Won't come in, won't say a word to me. May squinted into the darkness. Tom sat with his back to the cabin, his shoulders curved forward, his head bowed low. Even from this distance, she could see the tension coiled in his body, the rigid stillness of someone holding himself together by nothing but stubborn will. What happened? Silas shook his head. Don't rightly know. He was fine at supper. Then I heard the back door slam, and when I went looking, he trailed off. His hands gripped the porch railing, knuckles white in the moonlight. May looked at Tom, then at Silas. You want me to try? I don't know what else to do. May walked down the porch steps. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through her boots as she crossed the yard. The night air was cool on her face, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke and the distant sweetness of honeysuckle. She stopped a few feet from the boulder, close enough to speak, far enough not to crowd. Tom didn't turn around. His shoulders stiffened, though he knew she was there. May lowered herself onto a smaller rock nearby. Her knees cracked as she sat. She folded her hands in her lap and looked out at the same darkness Tom was staring into. The moon hung low over the mountain, fat and yellow as a ripe melon. An owl called somewhere in the trees, its voice low and lonesome. The silence between them stretched thin as spider silk. "You don't have to talk," May said finally. "I just came to sit a spell." Tom said nothing. May waited. The dew soaked deeper into her skirt. A mosquito whined near her ear, and she brushed it away without taking her eyes off the dark line of the ridge. "I found the flower," she said, "and the note." Tom's back went rigid as a fence post. "I didn't tell anyone," May continued. "That's your business, not mine. I just wanted you to know I saw it." The boy's head dropped lower. His hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists so tight she could see the cords standing out on his thin wrists. "It was stupid," he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw like he'd been swallowing gravel. "I don't know why I did it. Folks do things sometimes. Don't have to mean anything special." It meant something. May looked at the back of his head, the dark hair that needed cutting, the thin neck, the ears that stuck out just slightly. He was so young, carrying a load that would have broken most grown men. "Then it meant something," she said quietly. "That's all right, too." Tom was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, almost lost in the night sounds. "I didn't want to like you." May's chest tightened. She kept her voice steady. "I know. I wanted you to leave, like all the others. I wanted you to give up and go away, and then everything could just stay the same." "And how was that staying the same?" Tom's shoulders shook. Just once. A single tremor that ran through his whole body like a shudder of cold. "Wrong," he said. "Everything's been wrong since Mama died. And I thought maybe if I could keep things from changing anymore, maybe it wouldn't hurt so bad." May understood that. The desperate need to freeze time, to hold on to the shape of things even when the thing itself was long gone. She'd done it herself. After her mother passed, kept her mother's hairbrush on the nightstand for years, even after the bristles fell out. Wore her mother's old shawl until it fell apart in her hands, as if the objects themselves could fill the absence. They never could. "You can't keep things the same," May said quietly. "I wish to the Lord you could, but life keeps on moving whether we want it to or not." Tom turned his head. For the first time since she'd sat down, he looked at her. His face was wet tears he hadn't wiped away, catching the moonlight like silver. "Then what's the point?" His voice cracked down the middle. "What's the point of loving anybody if they just die and leave you all alone?" May didn't have a ready answer for that. She'd asked herself the same question 100 times, 1,000, and never found one that satisfied. "I don't rightly know," she said honestly. "But I reckon maybe the loving is the point all by itself. Even when it hurts, even when it ends, the loving is what makes us who we are." Tom stared at her. His jaw worked. He looked away, back toward the dark trees. They sat in silence as the moon climbed higher. The owl called again, closer this time. A breeze stirred the pines, carrying the smell of sap and earth and the promise of rain somewhere off to the west. "I should go back in," Tom said finally. His voice was steadier now, though still rough around the edges. "Your pa's been worried sick." "I know." He stood, brushing dirt and pine needles from his trousers. He looked down at May, and for a moment, something passed between them, not forgiveness. Not yet, but the beginning of something. an acknowledgement that they were both still here, still trying. "Thanks," he said, "for sitting with me." May nodded. "Anytime you need it." Tom walked back toward the cabin. May watched him go, his thin shoulders, his careful steps, the way he paused at the porch to murmur something to Silas before disappearing inside. She sat on the rock a while longer, letting the night settle around her like a familiar blanket. The next morning started wrong. May woke before dawn, as usual, and dressed in the dark. She made her way to the kitchen, lit the stove, and began preparing breakfast biscuits today, with gravy and the last of the eggs. The children came in one by one. Lily first, rubbing sleep from her eyes, then Ellie, already dressed and braided, then Tom, who looked tired but calmer than he had in days. Silas was already outside. May could hear the steady ring of his axe in the crisp morning air. She moved through the familiar routine, mixing dough, cutting biscuits, sliding them into the oven. The kitchen warmed around her, and steam rose from the coffee pot on the stove. She reached for a towel to wipe her hands and found none on the hook where she usually kept it, the cabinet by the stove. She'd seen towels in there before. May pulled open the door and rummaged inside. Dish rags, a worn tablecloth, a stack of old napkins, and her hand touched something soft, fabric, folded neatly into a square. She pulled it out without thinking. A blue and white striped apron, faded at the edges. The ties a little frayed from years of use, but clean and carefully kept. Hand-stitched seams, a pocket at the front, shaped like a heart. May unfolded it, studying the workmanship. It was well made, the kind of everyday garment that gets worn until it becomes a part of you. She slipped it over her head, tied the strings at her waist. It fit well enough, a little loose through the middle, but comfortable. She turned back to the stove. Tom stood in the kitchen doorway. His face had gone white as fresh milk. His whole body was frozen mid-step, like someone had turned him to stone right where he stood. May looked at him, confused. "Tom, what's the matter? Take it off?" His voice was strange, flat, but underneath it, something was vibrating, something barely contained, like a jar full of hornets. "What? Take it off." Louder now. His hands were shaking at his sides. "Take it off." May looked down at the apron. Blue and white stripes, hand-stitched seams, a heart-shaped pocket. Oh, Lord have mercy. "Tom, I didn't know. That's Mama's." The words tore out of him, raw, ragged, ripping through the quiet morning like a wound splitting open. "That's her apron. She wore it every single day. You have no right. You're not her. You'll never be her." He knocked a chair sideways as he spun around. It hit the floor with a crash that made Lily cry out from the table. Then he was gone. The back door slamming so hard the whole cabin shook on its foundation. May stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen. Her hands were trembling as she reached up and untied the apron strings. She folded the fabric carefully, slowly, deliberately, and placed it back in the cabinet, exactly where she'd found it. Her chest was tight. Her throat ached with something she couldn't swallow down. Behind her, Lily was crying softly. Ellie sat rigid in her chair, staring at her plate like she could make herself invisible if she just held still enough. May closed the cabinet door. She pressed her palm flat against the worn wood for a moment, steadying herself. Then she turned and walked outside. Silas found Tom by the creek. May heard their voices low, indistinct as she stood on the porch, gripping the railing. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the rhythm of them. Silas's voice, steady and patient. Tom's, broken and fierce by turns. She should go back inside, finish making breakfast, comfort the girls. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there, watching the tree line where Silas and Tom had disappeared, and let the morning air cool the heat in her face. The voices grew clearer as they approached. May caught fragments drifting up from the path. Didn't know, son. She had no way of knowing. I don't care. She shouldn't be touching Mama's things. She shouldn't even be here. Tom! Silas's voice, firm now. That's enough. They emerged from the trees, Silas first, his face grim and tired. Tom a few steps behind with his arms crossed tight over his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw set hard as granite. He saw May on the porch, stopped dead in his tracks. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the yard. May didn't apologize. She'd already apologized for the cornmeal, and it hadn't helped any. Some wounds couldn't be closed up with words, no matter how kindly meant. Instead, she said, "Your sisters need their breakfast. You coming in?" Tom's jaw tightened. He looked at his father, then back at May. "Why do you stay?" The question came out hard as a slap. "Everybody else leaves. Why don't you just go?" May considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. "Because leaving is easy," she said. "And I've done enough easy things in my life." Tom stared at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, not softening. Exactly. But changing somehow. The anger was still there, plain as day. But underneath it, something else was struggling to the surface. Something tender and raw. "You should leave," he said. But his voice had lost its edge. Now it just sounded tired, defeated, scared. "You should leave before—" He stopped. His mouth pressed into a thin line. "Before what?" May asked. Tom didn't answer. He pushed past her into the cabin, letting the door bang shut behind him. Silas climbed the porch steps slowly, his boots heavy on the wood. He stopped beside May, looking at the closed door with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Before what?" May asked again, turning to him. Silas was quiet for a moment. His face looked older somehow than it had just an hour ago, like the morning had added years to him. "Before he starts needing you," Silas said quietly. "That's what scares him most. Needing somebody again and having them leave." May looked at the door, at the cabin that held 3 wounded children and a man who was barely holding them all together with nothing but stubbornness and prayer. "I told him I'm staying," she said. "I know you did. Know you." Silas turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. But saying it ain't the same as proving it. For Tom, words don't mean much of anything anymore. Then how do I prove it? Silas didn't answer. He walked into the cabin, leaving May alone on the porch with a question she didn't know how to answer. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the dew. The chickens clucked and scratched in the yard. Somewhere in the pines, a woodpecker hammered against bark in a steady, determined rhythm. May looked out at the mountain, the vast, patient mountain that had watched generations of folks come and go, love and lose, break and mend themselves back together. And she wondered, for the first time since she'd arrived, if staying might cost her more than she had left to give. May didn't eat supper that night. She served the children potato soup again, simple and filling, and stood by the stove while they ate. Tom kept his head down, his spoon moving mechanical and joyless from bowl to mouth. Ellie watched May with worried eyes, her own food barely touched, Lily kept glancing between her brother and the woman by the stove, her small face pinched with confusion. Silas ate in silence. He didn't look at May, didn't look at anyone. When the meal was finished, May collected the bowls. She washed them in the basin, dried them, put them away in the cabinet. Her movements were automatic, disconnected, like her hands belonged to someone else entirely. The children went to bed one by one, footsteps fading down the hall, doors closing soft. The cabin settling into the deep quiet of evening. Silas stood, his chair scraped against the floor. May. I'm fine. The words came out flat, wrong. I'll finish cleaning up. You should get some rest. He hesitated. She could feel him watching her, the weight of his gaze on her back like a hand she couldn't shake off. Then his boots crossed the floor, and the front door opened and closed with a quiet click. May stood at the basin, her hands gripping the cold iron edge. The water had gone gray and greasy. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark surface, distorted, wavering, broken into pieces. You're not her. You'll never be her. Tom's words echoed in her skull, bouncing around like stones in an empty bucket. She'd heard worse in her life. Lord knows she had. She'd been called fat, ugly, worthless. She'd been told she took up too much space, ate too much food, wanted too much from a world that had no room for the likes of her. But this was different. This wasn't about what she was. It was about what she could never be, what she could never replace. She wasn't Sarah. She couldn't fill that absence any more than you could fill a grave with flowers and expect the dead to rise. She was just a large woman with a worn-out bag and nowhere else to go, playing pretend in a house that would never truly be hers. May's hands started to shake. She pressed them flat against the basin, trying to hold herself steady. It didn't work. She walked to the small room Silas had given her. The cot, the shelves of preserves and forgotten things, the narrow window that looked out on nothing but trees and darkness. Her bag was in the corner. The same canvas bag she'd carried up the mountain nearly a month ago now. She hadn't unpacked it, not really. A dress hung on a nail. Her embroidery sat on the shelf. But everything else was still inside, still waiting, still ready for her to leave. May picked up the bag. It was lighter than she remembered. She'd used some of the things inside the extra stockings, a few hairpins, but it was still her bag, still the only thing in this whole cabin that truly belonged to her. She sat on the edge of the cot, the bag in her lap. 3 weeks. She'd been here 3 weeks, long enough to learn the children's names, their habits, their silent fears, long enough to feel something like hope when Lily smiled at her, when Ellie asked to learn embroidery, when Tom left a flower and a note on the porch railing. Not long enough to matter. Tom was right. Everyone else had left. What made her think she was any different? The lamp on the shelf flickered, the flame guttering low on its wick. May watched the shadows dance on the wall, stretching and shrinking like living things. She should go. Pack up what little she had. Slip out before dawn. Leave a note to explain. It would be easier for everyone. The children wouldn't have to watch her fail. Silas wouldn't have to pretend she was helping. Tom wouldn't have to keep fighting a battle he'd already won. May stood. Her legs felt wooden, heavy as fence posts. She pulled on her boots, the same worn boots she'd walked up the mountain in, and picked up the bag. The hallway was dark. She moved through it slowly, carefully, her hand trailing along the wall for guidance. Past the children's rooms, where soft breathing whispered through the cracks under the doors. Past Silas's room, where no light showed, into the kitchen, where the stove had burned down to embers and the dishes sat clean and dry on the shelf. Everything in its place, as if she'd never been here at all. May crossed to the back door. Her hand closed around the latch. The iron cold against her palm. She lifted it. The door swung open. Night air rushed in. Damp and cool. Carrying the smell of pine and wet earth and the distant promise of rain, May stepped onto the porch. The darkness was near absolute. No moon tonight, clouds had rolled in during supper. Thick and heavy, heavy as wool blankets. The mountain was invisible, swallowed whole by the black. She started down the steps. Her boot caught on the edge of the bottom step, a loose board she'd meant to tell Silas about. Her ankle twisted. She grabbed for the railing, missed, and went down hard. The mud caught her. 3 days of rain the week before had left the yard soft and treacherous. May landed on her hands and knees, the cold muck squelching up between her fingers, soaking through her skirt, spattering across her face. Her bag flew from her grip and landed somewhere in the dark with a wet thump. She tried to stand. Her boots slipped in the mud, and she went down again, this time on her side, her hip striking a half-buried rock that sent pain shooting up her spine. May lay in the mud, staring up at the black sky. This was it. Then, this was what her life had come to. A fat woman lying in the muck in the middle of the night, running away from children who didn't want her, from a man who didn't need her, from a place where she would never belong. The mud was cold. It seeped through her clothes, pressed against her skin, filled her nose with the smell of rot and earthworms. She could feel it in her hair now, could taste it on her lips. She should get up. She knew she should get up. But what was the point? The tears came then, hot and shameful, mixing with the mud on her face. She hadn't cried, really cried, since she'd arrived. There had been too much to do, too many people watching, too much at stake to let herself fall apart. But now, lying in the dark with no one to see, she couldn't hold it back anymore. She cried for her mother, dead these 10 years, for the life she'd imagined and never gotten, for every door that had closed in her face, every whispered insult, every time she'd looked in a mirror and seen nothing worth loving. She cried for Tom, who was so angry and so terrified underneath all that anger. She cried for Silas, who had lost the woman he loved and was drowning in plain sight while his children watched. She cried for Lily and Ellie, who needed someone to take care of them and had been given her instead. And she cried for herself, for the woman she'd been and the woman she was trying so hard to become, for the gap between them that sometimes seemed wider than the whole blamed sky. The mud soaked deeper into her clothes. Her body shook with cold and grief. The darkness pressed down on her like a weight she couldn't lift. Then she heard it. A small voice, cutting through the night. May. May's head jerked up. A light was moving on the porch, a candle, held in a child's hand, the flame wavering in the night breeze. Lily stood at the top of the steps in her white nightgown, barefoot, her hair wild around her face. Her eyes were wide, confused, still foggy with sleep. May, she said again. What are you doing out here? May opened her mouth. Nothing came out but a croak. Lily set the candle down on the porch railing and started down the steps, careful on the loose board. "Don't," May's voice came back to her, rough and broken. "Don't come down here, honey." The mud? But Lily was already there, standing at the edge of the muck, her bare toes sinking into the cold earth. "Are you hurt?" No, I'm not hurt. I fell. That's all." "Why are you out here? Why is your bag—" Lily stopped. Her face changed in the candlelight, confusion giving way to something else, something that looked like fear. "Were you leaving?" The question hung in the air between them, small and terrified and impossible to avoid. May looked at the girl, at her bare feet in the mud, at her thin nightgown, already spotted with damp, at the candle flickering on the porch, the only light in all that darkness. "I thought—" May's voice broke. She swallowed, tried again. "I thought it might be easier. For everyone." Lily shook her head. "That's dumb." Despite everything, the mud, the cold, the shame burning in her chest, May almost laughed. "Is it now?" "Yes." Lily stepped closer, her feet squelching in the muck. "Tom says mean things sometimes." "He doesn't mean them. Not really. He's just sad and he doesn't know how to be sad right." "I know, honey. And Pa needs you. He doesn't say so, but I can tell. He sleeps better now. He doesn't look so worried all the time. Lily, and I need you." Lily's voice cracked. "I need you. May. You're the only one who sits with me when I'm sad. You're the only one who doesn't tell me to stop crying." May's eyes burned. Her throat closed up tight as a fist. Lily reached down and grabbed May's hand, both hands, actually closing her small fingers around May's muddy ones without a second thought. "Please don't go," she whispered. "Please. I'll be good. I'll be so good. Just please don't leave us." May looked at the child standing in the mud before her, this small, fierce girl who had lost her mother and was trying so hard not to lose anyone else. And something inside her cracked open, not breaking, not falling apart, opening. "Help me up," May said. Lily pulled, May pushed. Between the two of them, she managed to get her feet under her, to stand upright in the muck, to find her balance on the treacherous ground. She was covered in mud. It was in her hair, on her face, soaking through every layer of her clothes. She probably looked like some kind of swamp creature risen from the depths. Lily didn't seem to notice. She just held onto May's hand and started leading her back toward the porch. "Come on," she said. "We'll get you cleaned up. I know where the good towels are." May let herself be led. At the top of the steps, she looked back. Her bag lay somewhere in the darkness, forgotten in the mud. She left it there. They ended up in the kitchen, with a basin of warm water and a pile of clean rags. May sat on Sarah's mending stool, while Lily wiped the mud from her face with a gentleness that made May's heart ache. The child's tongue poked out between her lips as she worked, her small face fierce with concentration. "You've got it in your eyebrows," Lily observed. "I'm not surprised." "And your ears. That either?" Lily giggled. The sound was startling in the quiet kitchen, bright and clean, like a bell ringing in an empty church. May found herself smiling, her first real smile in days. "There," Lily said, stepping back to examine her work. "You look almost normal now." "Almost. Your hair's still pretty bad." May reached up and felt the tangled, mud-caked mess on her head. "I reckon I'll need more than a basin for that. You can use the washtub tomorrow. That's what Mama used to do when we got real dirty." The mention of Sarah didn't sting the way it might have an hour ago. It was just a fact, a memory. shared without pain. That sounds like a fine idea, May said. Lily yawned suddenly, her whole face scrunching up with the force of it. She swayed on her feet, the late hour finally catching up with her. You should get back to bed, May said. Will you come with me? Just till I fall asleep? May hesitated. Her clothes were still damp, still filthy. She should change, should clean up properly. Should please. Lily's eyes were huge in the lamplight. All right, May said. Just till you fall asleep. They walked down the hallway together. Lily's small hand wrapped around two of May's fingers. Lily's room was tiny, barely more than a closet. Really, but it was warm and clean, with a narrow bed pushed against the wall and a patchwork quilt spread across it. May recognized the stitching. Sarah's work, most likely. Lily climbed under the covers and patted the space beside her. May sat on the edge of the bed. The frame creaked under her weight, but it held. Will you stay? Lily asked, her eyes already drooping. Not just tonight. Will you stay forever? May looked down at the girl this small, fierce, loving child who had dragged her out of the mud and back into the light. I'll stay, she said. As long as you'll have me. Lily smiled. Her eyes closed. Within minutes, her breathing had gone slow and even, her small body relaxing into sleep. May sat there in the dark, listening to the child breathe, feeling the warmth of her small body through the quilt. Outside, rain began to fall soft at first, then harder, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. May closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she stayed. And somewhere in the darkness, she heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. She opened her eyes. A shadow stood in the doorway, too tall to be one of the girls, too still to be Silas. Tom. He stood there watching her, his face unreadable in the dark. Rain dripped from his hair, soaking into his nightshirt. He must have been outside. Must have seen everything. May held his gaze. Didn't speak. Didn't move. Tom's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I saw you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. In the mud, I saw you crying. May's face burned. The shame she'd felt out there came rushing back, hot and heavy. I saw you, Tom repeated. And I saw Lily bring you back in. May still didn't speak. What was there to say? Tom took a step into the room, then another. He stopped at the foot of Lily's bed, his hands hanging loose at his sides. You were really going to leave, he said. It wasn't a question. I thought about it because of what I said. Partly, Tom's jaw worked. His eyes were wet, but no tears fell. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out rough, like they'd had to fight their way past something in his throat. I didn't mean I don't want you to... He stopped, swallowed hard. I don't want you to go, he whispered. I thought I did, but I don't. May looked at him, this boy who had fought so hard to push her away, now standing in the dark, asking her to stay. Then I won't, she said simply. Tom stood there a moment longer. Then he nodded once, sharp and quick, and turned away. He paused at the door. Tomorrow, he said, not looking back. Will you teach me how to make the corn cakes? May's breath caught in her chest. Yes, she said. "I'll teach you." Tom walked out into the hallway. His footsteps faded toward his room. May sat in the darkness, Lily sleeping warm beside her, rain falling steady on the roof. And for the first time since she'd come to this mountain, she knew exactly where she belonged. The morning after the longest night of May's life began with flour on her hands and a question she still couldn't answer. She stood at the counter, kneading dough for corn cakes, her fingers working the mixture with a rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. The stove was hot, the coffee was brewing, and outside the window the rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and dripping with fresh promise. Her clothes from last night were soaking in the washtub out back. She'd scrubbed most of the mud from her hair before the children woke, though she could still feel grit behind her ears if she turned her head just right. Tom had asked to learn how to make corn cakes. That fact kept circling through her mind, refusing to settle into anything that made sense. The same boy who had screamed at her about his mother's apron, who had told her she would never belong here, had stood in the dark and asked her to teach him something. May shaped the batter into rounds, dropped them onto the hot griddle. The cornmeal hissed and sputtered, edges crisping to a golden brown. She flipped the cakes with the worn wooden spatula, stacked them on a plate, added more batter to the pan. The children drifted in one by one. Lily first, as always, her hair still tangled from sleep, but her face bright and rested. She climbed onto the bench at the table and watched May work. Her chin propped in her hands, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Ellie next, already dressed and braided, her movements quiet and contained. She sat beside Lily and pulled May's embroidery hoop toward her, examining the stitches she'd added yesterday with a critical eye. Tom last. He stopped in the doorway, his hair damp from washing, his shirt tucked neat into his trousers. He looked different, somehow younger. Maybe. Or just less armored. The hard set of his jaw had softened overnight, and his eyes, when they met May's, held something that hadn't been there before. May straightened up from the stove. "Morning, morning." Tom's voice was rough, uncertain. He cleared his throat. You still want to teach me the corn cakes?" Lily's head swiveled toward her brother, her eyes going wide. Ellie looked up from the embroidery, her mouth falling open just slightly. May wiped her hands on her apron. Not Sarah's apron, the plain brown one she'd brought with her from Ridgeback. "I do," she said. "If you're still wanting to learn." Tom nodded. He walked to the counter and stood beside her, his arms hanging awkward at his sides, like he didn't know what to do with them. "First thing," May said, "is you wash your hands. Can't make food with dirty fingers." Tom moved to the basin and scrubbed his hands with the lye soap, dried them on the towel hanging from the nail. He came back to the counter and looked at May, waiting. "All right then." May pushed the bowl of cornmeal toward him. "We start with measuring. 2 cups of meal to 1 cup of buttermilk. That's the ratio, you remember that. You can make these anywhere." Tom scooped the cornmeal into the measuring cup, leveled it off with his finger the way May showed him. His movements were careful, deliberate, like he was handling something precious. "Buttermilk next," May said. "You want it at room temperature if you can manage it. Cold buttermilk makes the batter clump up something awful." Tom poured the buttermilk slowly, watching it swirl into the dry ingredients. A drop splashed onto his wrist, and he wiped it away without taking his eyes off the bowl. Now stir. Not too hard, you're not trying to beat it into submission. Just bring it together. Nice and gentle. Tom stirred, His movements were awkward at first, the spoon clacking against the sides of the bowl. But he found a rhythm, and the batter came together smooth, thick, the color of summer sunshine. "How do you know when it's ready?" he asked. "When it falls off the spoon like thick cream. See how it drips, slow, but not sticky. That's what you're looking for." Tom held up the spoon, watching the batter drip in a golden ribbon. Like that, just exactly like that. May heated the griddle, showed him how to test it with a drop of water if it sizzled and vanished quick. The pan was ready. Tom ladled the batter carefully, his tongue poking out between his lips as he concentrated. The first cake came out lopsided. Too thin on one side, too thick on the other. "That's all right," May said. "First one's always practice." The second was better. The third was nearly perfect round, golden, edges crisp as a fall morning. Tom stared at it with an expression May couldn't quite name. Something that looked like pride, maybe. And underneath it, something softer, more tender. "Mama was going to teach me," he said quietly, his eyes still on the griddle. "Before she got sick. I wasn't any good at it back then. But she said I'd learn if I kept trying." May stood beside him, close enough to feel the heat rising from the stove. "She was right about that." Tom flipped a cake with the spatula. His movements were surer, now still careful, but less hesitant. "I miss her," he said. The words came out raw, unguarded, like he'd forgotten to put his armor back on. "I miss her every single day. And sometimes I get so mad about it I can't think straight. I just want to break things. Hurt things. Make the world hurt as bad as I do." May didn't interrupt. She just listened, the way she'd learned to listen these past weeks. "But then I do something mean like what I said to you about Mama's apron, and afterward I feel worse. Not better." Tom set down the spatula. His hands were trembling just slightly. "I'm tired of being mad all the time, May. I'm so tired of it." "Then maybe it's time to try something different." Tom looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Like what? Like being something else. Just for today, and then again tomorrow, and the day after that. One day at a time." "What if I can't?" May reached out and put her hand on his shoulder, the first time she'd touched him since she'd arrived. He didn't pull away. "Tom, you got up before dawn to get eggs because you thought I might need them. You asked me to teach you something your mama never got the chance to teach you. You're standing here in this kitchen right now, making corn cakes, when you could be anywhere else." She paused, letting the words settle. "You're already doing it. You just haven't noticed yet." Tom's face crumpled. The tears came then, hot, messy. The kind of tears that had been building for 3 long years. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps that sounded like they'd been pulled up from somewhere deep and wounded. May didn't hug him. She'd learned that some folks don't want to be held when they're falling apart. They need space to put themselves back together. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat down beside him. Close enough to be present, far enough to give him room. Tom cried. The corn cakes sat forgotten on the griddle, edges starting to darken past golden. When the sobs finally slowed to hiccups, May stood and moved the griddle off the heat. She scraped the burned cakes into the slop bucket and wiped down the surface. "We'll make more," she said. "Whenever you're ready, Tom wiped his face with his sleeve. His eyes were swollen, his nose running. He looked wrecked, and somehow, underneath all that, lighter than May had ever seen him. May, yes? I'm glad you didn't leave. The words hung in the air between them, simple, honest, carrying the weight of everything he couldn't say. May turned back to the stove, her throat too tight for speech. So am I, she managed finally. So am I. They made a fresh batch of corn cakes together. May measured. Tom stirred. She showed him how to test the griddle, how to know when to flip, how to tell by smell alone when the cakes were done just right. Lily watched from the table with undisguised delight, bouncing on the bench like she couldn't contain her excitement. Ellie had set aside the embroidery and was watching too, her usually guarded face soft with something that looked like hope. By the time Silas came in from his morning chores, a stack of golden corn cakes sat steaming in the center of the table. Tom stood beside May at the stove, a dusting of flour on his shirt and a tentative smile on his face. Silas stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved from the corn cakes to Tom to May and back again, taking in the scene with an expression that was hard to read. Tom made those, May said. I just helped. Silas looked at his son. Something passed between them, a question, an answer. Things that couldn't be said out loud, but didn't need to be. Let's say grace, Silas said quietly. They gathered around the table. Silas at the head, May on the mending stool, the 3 children on the bench, 5 people around a table built for 5. Silas bowed his head. Lord, we thank you for this food and for the hands that made it. We thank you for bringing us through another night and for giving us the strength to face another day. We thank you for May and for her patience with this family. Bless us all and keep us in your care. Amen. Amen, May whispered, her eyes stinging. Lily reached for a corn cake immediately, tearing into it with eager fingers. These are so good. Tom, you made these. May helped, Tom said, but there was pride in his voice now. Real pride, warm and unguarded. Ellie took a cake and bit into it, chewing thoughtfully. The edges are crispy. I like that. Tom ducked his head, but May caught the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Silas ate without comment, but he took 3 corn cakes, more than May had ever seen him eat at a single meal. When he finished, he set down his fork and looked across the table at May. Good breakfast, he said. 2 words, but the way he said them carried more weight than a whole sermon. May nodded, not trusting her voice. After the meal, when the dishes were done and the children had scattered to their morning chores, Silas found May on the porch. She was sitting in a patch of sunshine, letting the warmth soak into her bones after the cold damp of the night before. Her mud-caked bag still lay somewhere in the yard. She hadn't gone looking for it yet. Wasn't sure she wanted to. Silas settled into the chair beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Just sat and watched the morning unfold, the chickens scratching in the yard, the steam rising from the wet grass, the mountain shining green and gold in the fresh, washed light. Tom told me what happened last night, Silas said finally. About you in the mud. About him asking you to stay. May kept her eyes on the mountain. He did. Silas was quiet for a moment. He also told me what you said. About staying as long as we'd have you. I meant it. I know you did. Silas turned to look at her. His face was different today, more open, less guarded, like something that had been locked up tight for years was finally starting to ease. That's why I wanted to ask you something. May's heart stuttered. Ask me what? Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, something that caught the morning light and threw it back in pieces. A key? Iron? Old? Worn smooth by years of handling. This was Sarah's, he said. Key to the front door. She kept it on a ribbon around her neck. Said it meant this was her home, really hers, not just a place she was passing through. May stared at the key. Her mouth had gone dry. I'm not asking you to be Sarah, Silas said quietly. Nobody could be, and nobody should try. But I'm asking if you'd be willing to stay. Not for a month, not for a season, for good. The key lay in his palm, glinting in the sun. May looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Silas, at his weathered face, his tired eyes, the hope he was trying so hard not to show. For good, she repeated. For good. His voice was rough. If you'll have us. May reached out and took the key. It was warm from his hand, heavy with years of history she'd never know. She closed her fingers around it. I'll have you, she said. Silas let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. He didn't smile, not exactly, but something in his face relaxed, like a rope that had been pulled too tight finally going slack. Then welcome home, May. She looked down at the key in her hand, at the cabin behind her, at the mountain rising up against the endless blue of the sky. Home. The word settled into her chest like a seed taking root. But as she sat there, letting the warmth of it spread through her, she heard footsteps coming up the path from the road below, quick, urgent, unfamiliar. She and Silas both turned to look. A man was walking toward the cabin, tall, thin, wearing a town coat and carrying a leather satchel. His face was set in the grim expression of someone bringing news that nobody wanted to hear. May didn't recognize him. But Silas did. He went pale. That's Doc Henley, he said. From town. The doctor raised his hand in greeting as he approached, but there was no warmth in the gesture. Mr. Mercer, he called out. Glad I caught you. We need to talk. May felt Silas stiffen beside her. His hand found hers, gripped it hard. What is it? Silas asked. What's wrong? Doc Henley stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. His eyes moved from Silas to May to the key still clutched in her palm. It's about the children, he said. There's been a complaint filed in town. Someone saying they should be placed with proper family, not left out here with a stranger. May's blood went cold. Who filed the complaint? Silas demanded. Doc Henley's face was grave. Your sister-in-law, he said. Sarah's sister. She's come to take the children home. The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a doused fire. Sarah's sister. She's come to take the children home. May's hand tightened around the key until the iron bit into her palm. Beside her, Silas had gone still as stone, his face draining of color. Martha, he said. The name came out flat, hollow. Martha's here. Doc Henley nodded, his expression weary. Arrived on the morning stage from Denver. She's at the hotel in town, getting settled. Said she'd be up to see you tomorrow, but she wanted me to come ahead and... He paused, choosing his words with care. Prepare you. Prepare me. Silas's voice was dangerous now, a low rumble like thunder building behind the mountains. Prepare me for what? Exactly, For her to waltz in after 3 years of silence and try to take my children. Mr. Mercer, I'm just the messenger here. I don't have a dog in this fight. Then why'd she send you? Doc Henley sighed. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. Because she knew you wouldn't listen to anyone else? And because she's not wrong about everything. Silas. The law's particular about these things. A widower living alone with 3 young children. One of them a girl near womanhood. His eyes flicked to May, then away. And now a strange woman sharing the household. It don't look right to some folks. May found her voice. I'm the housekeeper. Nothing more. I know that, ma'am. But Martha Welsh has money and connections in Denver. And she's convinced half the town council that those children would be better off with proper family. Doc Henley put his hat back on. I'm not saying she's right. I'm saying you'd best be prepared to prove she's wrong. Silas stood so abruptly his chair scraped back against the porch boards. His hands were shaking at his sides. Those are my children, he said. Mine and Sarah's. Martha didn't want anything to do with them when Sarah was alive, too busy with her society friends and her fancy house. She didn't come to the funeral. Didn't write. Didn't send so much as a card at Christmas. And now she wants to take them. People change, Silas. Not that much. Not Martha. Doc Henley spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I've said my piece. She'll be here tomorrow afternoon. What happens after that is between you and her, and whatever judge gets involved if it goes that far. He tipped his hat to May, nodded to Silas, and walked back down the path toward town. They watched him go until he disappeared around the bend in the road, swallowed by the trees. The silence that followed was absolute. May stood up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. Silas, don't... His voice cracked. He gripped the porch railing with both hands, his knuckles white as bone. Just don't. I need to think. He walked into the cabin without looking back. May stood alone on the porch, the key still clutched in her hand, and watched the mountain shimmer in the morning light. She found the children in the yard. Tom was splitting kindling by the woodpile, his movements fierce and rhythmic. Ellie sat on the fence rail, her embroidery forgotten in her lap, her eyes fixed on something far away. Lily was crouched by the chicken coop, poking at the dirt with a stick, her small shoulders hunched. They knew. Of course they knew. Sound carried in these mountains, and children heard more than adults ever gave them credit for. May walked to where Lily sat and lowered herself onto the ground beside her. The earth was damp from last night's rain, but she didn't care anymore about mud on her skirt. I don't want to go, Lily said without looking up. Her voice was small and fierce. I don't want to live with Aunt Martha. She smells like mothballs, and her house is too quiet. You've been to her house once, before Mama died? She has lots of rules. No running. No laughing too loud. No getting dirty. Lily poked harder at the ground. I'd have to be good all the time. I can't be good all the time. May reached over and stilled the stick in Lily's hand. Nobody can be good all the time, honey. That's not how people work. Then why does she want us? It was a fair question. May didn't have a good answer. She looked up and found Tom watching her from the woodpile. He'd stopped splitting kindling, the hatchet hanging loose in his grip. His face was tight, guarded the armor back in place, but not as thick as before. You should go, he said. His voice was flat, but May heard the tremor underneath. Before she gets here, before she sees you. May stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. Why would I do that? Because she'll use you against Pa. She'll say he's not fit to raise us if he's got some stranger living here. Tom's jaw worked. She'll say it's improper. Is that what you think, that I should leave? Tom's face crumpled for just a moment before he pulled it back together. I think you should do what's best for you. That's what everyone does eventually. May walked across the yard until she stood in front of him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes, the hope he was trying so hard to kill before it could hurt him again. Tom Mercer, she said quietly, I have been pushed out of more places than you've had hot suppers. I have been told I'm too fat, too plain, too much trouble to keep around. I have been made to feel like I don't deserve to take up space in this world. She reached out and put her hand over his where it gripped the hatchet handle. But I am done running. I am done letting other people decide where I belong. Your father gave me a key this morning and asked me to stay for good, and I said yes. That means something. So if your Aunt Martha wants to come up here and tell me I don't have the right to be in this family, she's going to have to look me in the eye and say it to my face. Tom stared at her. His lower lip trembled. You'd do that? He whispered. You'd stay and fight? I'd do more than that. May squeezed his hand. I'd win. Silas was in the kitchen when May came inside. He sat at the table, his head in his hands, the worn family Bible open in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and May saw that his eyes were red. I don't know what to do, he said. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. I've been sitting here praying for guidance, but all I hear is silence. May pulled out a chair and sat across from him. The Bible lay between them, open to a page in Psalms. She could see the words even upside down. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What does Martha have that you don't? May asked. Money, respectability, a big house in Denver with servants, and room for 3 children. Silas laughed bitterly. Everything I can't give them. Can she give them a father who loves them? Silas looked up. Can she give them a home where they're allowed to get dirty and make mistakes and be children? May pressed on. Can she give them someone who'll sit up with them when they have nightmares? Who'll teach them to make corn cakes? Who'll let them cry when they need to cry? May. I've only been here a month. Silas. But I've seen how much those children love you. I've seen how hard you work to keep this family together. You think a judge is going to look at that and say a rich woman in Denver can do better? Silas shook his head slowly. I don't know what a judge will say. Martha has influence. She knows how to work people, how to make them see things her way. She could make me look like... He stopped, swallowed hard. Like a failure. May reached across the table and closed her hand over his. Then we'll show them you're not, she said. We'll show them exactly what this family is. All of us. Together. Silas looked at her hand on his. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with something that might have been hope. You really mean to stay even if it gets ugly? Especially if it gets ugly. May smiled. I've got a lot of practice at ugly, Silas, and I'm still here. Martha Welsh arrived the next afternoon in a hired carriage. May was on the porch when the carriage came up the road, a fancy thing. Black lacquered wood with brass fittings, pulled by 2 matched bay horses that looked like they'd never worked a day in their lives. The driver pulled up at the edge of the yard, and a woman stepped out. She was thin where May was broad, elegant where May was plain. Her dress was dove gray silk, her hat trimmed with real feathers, her gloves spotless white kid leather. She looked at the cabin, at the muddy yard, at the chickens pecking in the dirt with an expression of barely concealed distaste. Then her eyes found May on the porch, and her lips pressed into a thin line. You must be the housekeeper, she said. Her voice was cool, polished, with an accent that spoke of finishing schools and parlor rooms. I'm Mrs. Welsh. I'm here to see my brother-in-law and my sister's children. May stood her ground. Mr. Mercer's expecting you. Won't you come in? Martha climbed the porch steps with the careful grace of someone who had never tripped on a loose board in her life. She paused in front of May, her eyes traveling from May's plain brown dress to her work-roughened hands to her face. You're not what I expected, she said. Ma'am, the letter I received described you as a temporary arrangement. Someone to cook and clean until proper help could be found. Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. But you seem to have made yourself quite at home. I have, May said simply. This is my home now. Something flickered in Martha's expression, surprise, maybe, or reassessment. Before she could respond, the door opened and Silas stepped out. He'd put on his good shirt. May noticed the one he wore to church on Sundays, pressed and clean. His beard was trimmed, his hair combed back. He looked almost like a stranger. Martha, he said. His voice was civil, but cold. Been a long time. 3 years. Martha's tone matched his. You look well, Silas. Better than I expected. Given... She gestured vaguely at the cabin, the yard, the mountain rising behind them. All this is my home and my children's home, which is why I have to wonder what you're really doing here. Martha's smile tightened. I think we should discuss that inside, away from... Her eyes flicked to May. The help. May felt her face flush hot, but before she could respond, Silas spoke. May is family, he said flatly. Anything you have to say can be said in front of her. Martha's eyebrows rose. Family. That's rather quick. Isn't it Sarah's barely cold in her grave? And you've already found a replacement? The words hung in the air like a slap. Silas's hands curled into fists at his sides. May saw the muscle jump in his jaw, saw him fighting to keep control. May is not a replacement, he said, his voice low and dangerous. No one could replace Sarah, but May has been here. Martha. She's been here every day, taking care of my children, keeping this family together. Where were you? Where was your concern for the children when Sarah was sick? When she died, when I was trying to hold everything together with nothing but prayer and stubbornness. Martha's face went pale. I had my reasons. Reasons. Silas laughed bitterly. You had your parties and your charity boards and your precious reputation to protect. You couldn't be seen associating with your sister's poor farmer husband and his ragged children. But now that there's a judge involved, now that there are appearances to maintain, suddenly you want to be a loving aunt. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Silas's voice rose. None of it Sarah dying wasn't fair. Raising 3 children alone wasn't fair. And you coming here now, trying to take them away from the only home they've ever known, that's the most unfair thing of all. The door creaked open behind them. Tom stood in the doorway, Ellie and Lily behind him. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, but Tom's jaw was set with a determination that made him look years older than 12. We're not going, he said. His voice didn't waver. Not with you, not anywhere. Martha turned to face him. For a moment, her composure cracked, and May saw something underneath something that might have been genuine feeling. Tom, she said, her voice softening. I know this is difficult, but I only want what's best for you and your sisters. You deserve better than... Better than what? Tom stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. Better than a father who loves us, better than a home where we belong, better than May, who stayed when everyone else left. Martha's eyes went to May, then back to Tom. You don't understand. I understand plenty. Tom's voice was steady now, strong. I understand that you didn't want us before. And I understand that the only reason you want us now is because it makes you look good. But we're not props for your charity, Aunt Martha. We're a family. And families stick together. Lily stepped forward and slipped her hand into May's. May's our family now, she said. She makes good corn cakes, and she doesn't mind if I get dirty, and she sits with me when I'm sad. She looked up at May with those wide, serious eyes. I don't want to go to Denver. I want to stay here. Ellie moved to stand beside her brother, her chin lifted. We all do, she said quietly. This is where Mama lived. This is where she's buried. This is home. Martha stood very still. Her face was unreadable, a mask of polished composure. But May saw her gloved hands tremble, just slightly, at her sides. I see, Martha said finally. Her voice was cool again, controlled. Well, it seems you've all made up your minds. We have, Silas said. He moved to stand with his children, his hand resting on Tom's shoulder. May joined them, Lily's small fingers still wrapped around her own. They stood together on the porch, all 5 of them, facing Martha Welsh and everything she represented. Martha looked at them for a long moment. Her eyes moved from face to face, lingering on each one as if memorizing them. Then, slowly, the tension drained from her shoulders. Sarah used to tell me I was too proud for my own good, she said quietly. Too concerned with what people thought. She said I'd miss what was right in front of me if I wasn't careful. She paused. Her eyes found Silas. I think maybe she was right. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. She held it out to Silas. This is the complaint I filed, she said. I'll withdraw it tomorrow. Tell the judge I was mistaken about the situation. Silas took the document, his face stunned. Martha. I told myself I was doing this for the children, for Sarah's memory. Martha's voice wavered, then steadied. But the truth is, I was angry. Angry that Sarah chose this life over the one I wanted for her. Angry that she found happiness here when I thought she deserved better. She looked at the cabin, at the mountain, at the family standing before her. But this is what she chose. And looking at her children, looking at how they've grown, I think maybe she chose well. She turned to go, then paused at the top of the porch steps. Mrs. May, was it? May nodded, too surprised to speak. Take care of them, Martha said. They deserve someone who'll stay. She walked down the steps, climbed into her carriage, and was gone. The sun was setting by the time the carriage disappeared around the bend in the road. May stood on the porch, the key still in her pocket, Lily's hand still in hers. Silas stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Tom and Ellie sat on the steps, watching the sky turn colors orange, pink, purple, fading into the deep blue of approaching night. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Lily tugged at May's hand. May? Yes, honey. Can we have corn cakes for supper, the ones Tom made? May looked down at the girl this small, fierce, loving child who had pulled her out of the mud and back into the light. I think that sounds just fine, she said. They went inside together, all 5 of them, filling the cabin with warmth and noise, and the clatter of dishes being set on the table. May lit the stove while Tom measured cornmeal. Ellie set out the plates. Lily picked wildflowers from the yard and arranged them in a jar on the table, blue forget-me-nots, bright as summer sky. Silas said grace over the meal, his voice steady and sure. Lord, we thank you for this food and for the hands that made it. We thank you for this family, the one we were given and the one we've chosen. We thank you for May, who stayed when staying was hard. Bless this home and all who dwell in it, now and forever. Amen. Amen, they said together. The corn cakes were golden, crisp at the edges. The butter melted into them in pools of pale yellow. They ate until the plate was empty, and then Tom made more, proud and careful at the stove. After supper, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Lily fell asleep against May's shoulder. Ellie leaned against her father's arm, her eyes heavy. Tom sat on the steps, looking up at the sky, his face peaceful in a way May had never seen before. Silas reached over and took May's hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. May looked out at the mountain, the vast, patient mountain that had watched over this family through joy and grief and everything in between. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. She thought about the road she'd walked up. A month ago now. The worn boots, the canvas bag, the weight of other people's judgments pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about the woman she'd been tired, alone, expecting nothing. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, still tired sometimes, but not alone. Never alone again. Lily stirred against her shoulder, murmuring something in her sleep. May smoothed the girl's hair and felt her settle. Tomorrow there would be work to do, the garden to tend, meals to cook, a household to run. There would be good days and hard days, laughter and tears, the ordinary miracle of family life unfolding one moment at a time. But tonight, there was this, a porch, a family, a home. May leaned back in her chair, the new chair, the one Silas had promised to build her. Though for now, the mending stool would do and let the peace of the evening settle into her bones. She was home, and she was staying. If you have read this far, I want to thank you for walking alongside May, Silas, Tom, Ellie, and Lily on their journey. This story was never about a woman finding a place to live. It was about finding a place to belong. It was about how broken folks, when they stop running from each other, can build something whole. I wrote this for those of you who have ever felt too much, too large, too loud, too different, too wounded. For those who have been judged before they could speak, dismissed before they could prove their worth. May taught me something important: staying is harder than leaving. Patience is braver than anger. And sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you lost. If this story reminded you of someone you love, or a place you once called home, I hope you will carry that feeling with you today. Thank you for reading. Thank you for staying. This story is a work of fiction inspired by classic Western tales of the American frontier, created solely for entertainment purposes. It does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental.